Okay, so here we go. Left off with viral hemorrhagic fevers. And as usual, it takes a few seconds for the computer to get caught up here. There we go. So the first one is called yellow fever. Yellow fever is obviously starts off with a high fever, headache, leads to nausea and vomiting. It gets its name yellow because it causes jaundice. Jaundice is yellowing of the skin and the whites of the eye due to liver failure. It has about a 20% mortality rate. There is a yellow fever vaccine available. It's found in parts of Central and South America as well as throughout Africa. Depending on where in the world you are, if you happen, well, first of all, if you happen to be able to get the vaccine or not, and if you're not able to get the vaccine and you get the disease, again, depending on the part of the world, whether there are hospitals and doctors, there are treatments available, but it is certainly a very severe, dangerous disease. Hemorrhagic fever, the hemorrhagic part refers to the bleeding out from the organs. So some of these viruses can actually cause actual organs to start to break down and liquefy, and you basically kind of bleed out of your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your nose. It's pretty horrible. So a lot of these are spread by the mosquito. So the yellow fever is most definitely spread by the mosquito. It's also spread by human-to-human contact. And then monkeys of, the local monkeys are the reservoirs. So what can happen is the mosquito can bite a monkey that's infected with the virus, and then the mosquito goes and bites a human, and then that's how the human can get it. Or, humans can give it to each other through close contact. Dengue fever is similar to yellow fever, but it's not as severe. It's not as fatal. There is no vaccine available, and of course, it is spread by the mosquito. The Marburg virus is so named because this horrendous event occurred in a place in Germany called Marburg. So what happened was there were monkeys being imported pretty much illegally from Africa to Germany to be sold as pets. And what happened was these monkeys were carrying this very dangerous, deadly virus that if they were to bite or scratch or share food with a human, they would pass it on to the human. They would get very high fever. It would be followed by, hemorrhaging, vomiting blood, and then death occurs within a few days. This is actually, the Marburg virus is extremely similar to the Ebola virus. The symptoms of the disease, the way the virus does what it does, very, very similar to Ebola. So the relatively newer hemorrhagic fevers, the hemorrhagic fevers that have only been around for 50 years, give or take, are Lassa fever, Ebola, and Hanta. They're all very, very bad diseases. They have very high mortality rates. Common reservoirs are rats and bats. The virus is shed in the urine and feces of the animals. But the other thing that often happens with these three viruses is that the local people will actually eat the rodents or the bats or the monkeys that are infected by the same animals, because the rats and bats can either give it to people or give it to monkeys and apes. And then if the people were to come into contact with any of those animals, they could also get the disease. So because of the Ebola being in the news a few years back, I've added to this PowerPoint. I added to this PowerPoint a few years ago about Ebola. So it first appeared in Africa in 1976. It's named after the local river. So the river was actually called the Ebola River. Again, the Ebola virus and the Marburg virus are very similar to each other. They both interfere with blood clotting, which is why there's such a severe hemorrhagic fever. Again, for the Ebola virus, the reservoir is most likely a fruit bat that the local humans would eat. And then human to human transmission was also very common. So it's spread by contact with bodily fluids, reusing needles, and through sexual contact. So again, the people could get it either from eating the bat or by coming into contact with other people. Another thing that really spread the virus quite quickly is a lot of the local people around the area. A part of their burial rituals was to wash the bodies. And what would happen is the people that were engaged in washing the dead bodies before they buried them, that would actually spread the virus very quickly, because as the blood was being washed off the dead body, it could be getting into wounds and cuts of other people, and that spread the disease very quickly. So that's how they had. Again, if you do your research, you can look in your book, you can look online. There were several big outbreaks of Ebola throughout the 80s and 90s in Africa because of a lot of these issues, whether it was the sharing of needles, whether it was the washing of the bodies. So then the largest outbreak, except for what's happening right now, because there is actually the worst outbreak ever is happening right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa now. But back in 2014 is when the disease made it to the United States for the first time. That was due to air travel. So our airplanes have now gotten so fast that you could actually have someone who has Ebola but doesn't have any symptoms yet. They can get on a plane and go to another part of the world, and then they start to show symptoms. So it only takes a few days to start to show symptoms, and it kills you relatively quickly. So that's what really kept the disease contained to that particular part of Africa, is because people would be dead within a week or two, and they wouldn't really have time to go anywhere. They would get really sick within a few days, and then within a couple weeks they'd be dead. So that really kept the disease from spreading. But now that we have people traveling to different parts of Africa and then, leaving there and going to the US or going to Europe, it was made possible for the first time for the disease to really spread. But, keep in mind, there is currently an outbreak right now in Africa that's the worst that's ever been seen. And it has about a 90% mortality rate. So it is a very dangerous, fatal disease. Okay, so enough about the horrible viruses. Let's talk about some parasites or protozoa. So the first one is going to be somewhat similar, because we talked about African sleeping sickness. We know that the technical term for it is trypanosomiasis. Well, there is an American version of trypanosomiasis, and it's called Chagas disease. It's caused by a very closely related parasite called Trypanosoma cruzi. The vector is the kissing bug. It's called the kissing bug because it likes to bite people on the lips while they're asleep. So this is a disease in Texas, Mexico, Central and South America. It's similar to African sleeping sickness. It's not quite as dangerous. It's not as virulent and deadly, but it can certainly make you very, very sick. It's especially dangerous for younger children because, again, of their immune systems not being able to fight it off. So this is just an American version of trypanosomiasis. Instead of the tsetse fly, it's the kissing bug. And instead of being called African sleeping sickness, it's called Chagas disease. Toxoplasmosis is another disease caused by a protozoan. Toxoplasma gondii is the organism. You may have heard this before because it is a very, very dangerous disease for pregnant women. It's very dangerous for the developing fetus. It can cause birth defects or stillbirths. It's also an extremely dangerous disease for people with AIDS. I have the life cycle here for you, and if I can find it in the book here. This is on page 663. So this is why if someone becomes pregnant and they have pet cats, it is crucial that they find someone else to clean out the litter box and deal with anything that's potentially been, touched by the cat. Now, it really is only cats that hunt, so cats that kill mice or birds are really the main things you have to worry about, but it's really not worth taking any kind of chance. So if you become pregnant and you have a pet cat, if you can get someone to just take care of the cat for a while for you, that would be great. If you can't do that, you at least have to find somebody who can scoop out the litter box for you, because you do not want to come into contact in any way, shape, or form. You don't want to come into contact with cat feces if you're pregnant, because toxoplasmosis is very, very dangerous for the fetus, and it can be potentially deadly. So speaking of deadly, the next disease we're going to talk about is malaria. So malaria is caused by a protozoan called Plasmodium. There's actually 4 different types of malaria that are carried by 4 different types of Plasmodium. The vector is the Anopheles mosquito. And this disease is one of the major reasons why mosquitoes will pretty much always be the #1 killer of humans. Malaria, it's said that malaria kills an African child every 30 seconds. About between 1 and 2 million people a year die from malaria. It's a very serious, deadly disease. It is really throughout the world, but it is mostly found in Africa and Asia. But it can be found, just about anywhere where there are these types of mosquitoes. The symptoms can be anywhere from flu-like symptoms to nausea and vomiting. Eventually, the malaria parasite will develop inside the human. And as it develops, it will destroy red blood cells and liver cells. So the person will eventually experience anemia and then liver failure, and then that will lead to death. The only thing that really is being done about malaria is try to control mosquitoes, which is basically an impossible thing to do. There are prophylactic drugs and drugs available to treat the disease, but you're talking about a whole lot of people, and mostly people who are poor, who don't have access to good doctors or medicine, and that's why it kills so many people. It's just there's not enough being done to get the medicine and to get the drugs out there to a lot of the parts of Africa and Asia that are affected by malaria, and it's just a really horrific, terrible disease. Another one is leishmaniasis. This is pretty much found in the tropics and throughout the Mediterranean, throughout Saudi Arabia, those places, that part of the world. The organism is called Leishmania. The vector is the sandfly. And this is another disease that's especially dangerous for people with HIV and AIDS. Again, another protozoal disease that's transmitted by a vector. And then our last disease here for this chapter is schistosomiasis, which is caused by a fluke. A fluke is a very small type of freshwater flatworm. And what can happen is the little baby fluke can actually burrow through the skin. It develops inside the person, and it can cause some very severe blood clots, which can lead to it can lead to gastrointestinal issues. It can lead to heart issues, and the intermediate host is actually a freshwater snail. So if you're swimming in contaminated water with a lot of snails, that's when you have to worry about it. And I am out of time, so that is it for chapter 23.